At issue this week, a federal budget with a focus on housing and affordability and a tax hike aimed at rich people and corporations.
We're driving the kind of economic growth that will ensure every generation of Canadians can reach their full potential. And we're making Canada's tax system more fair by ensuring that the very wealthiest pay their fair share.
The Conservatives say the budget won't help economic growth and won't support it.
Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton here for a special Tuesday at Issue to break down the federal budget. Chantal Hebert and Coyne and Althia Raj. We saw each other earlier today. I'm glad you're back to talk more about the budget and what it was intended to do. So maybe let's start with that. This was trying to win back support. Andrew, I'll start with you on that, particularly from younger Canadians. Is there enough meat in there to do that?
Well, so much of it has been telegraphed already, of course, or not just telegraphed, but revealed and released prior to the budget. So that had the benefit for them of allowing them to have several days of news coverage about it. But the downside of it is when you actually get to the big day itself, not a lot of that is going to be terribly surprising. There is a number of items on the housing front, and if you add it all up, it adds up to a fair degree of support on that, but nothing like, nevertheless, what's going to be required. Mm-hmm. So even if you accept the government's numbers, they're going to increase housing by 1.2 million more units. That's about a third of what the CMHC said they needed to do to actually bring back some measure of affordability. So there's so much more still to be done. I think the biggest failure, though, on the budget front is on the growth front, which affects not just young people, but everybody. If we don't have a faster growing economy, we're not going to be able to afford anything. And there's virtually nothing in this budget that will actually raise levels of investment of the kind that we need to get higher productivity and higher growth rates. I think that's the biggest failure.
Well, what about the AI and the tax credits for EV vehicles, all that kind of stuff? That's there, but it's not enough, is your point?
It's great for shuffling things around. It diverts capital and investment into those favorite sectors at the expense of other sectors. There's nothing there. What you need is higher rates of investment generally, not just in the government's pet sectors.
Okay. Chantal.
Of course, Justin Trudeau's not going to be running against Andrew Coyne, as at last I checked, in the next election. He's going to be running against Pierre Poilievre, whose growth plan for the economy is still a work in progress. So we'll see how the two stack up. I think, by and large, I'm going to talk about the politics of this budget.
Yes.
By keeping, most people keep track of, are we spending too much? Is the deficit going up? And for sure, the opposition, the Conservatives, expected to be saying, look, she said last fall 40 billions and now it's almost 50. That didn't happen through tax hikes in part, but also through better revenues. So the government made the choice to spend more, but managed to keep that number at the same level. Politically, that's good comms. Every time you say, as you have just said, and as I've read in I don't know how many headlines, tax the rich, I think that's a good headline for the Liberals. Okay. It sends the message, oh yeah, they're going after the fat cats. That's not totally true, by the way, but it works. And there's also somewhere in there a gift or a way to try to fend off some of the carbon tax attack of Pierre Poilievre in the shape of rebates to small businesses for the carbon tax that they've been paying in the provinces where it applies the federal carbon pricing scheme since it was introduced. That's a nice rebate, by the way. Yeah. And it does blunt Poilievre's crusade with a certain segment of the voting population that does have some influence on people who vote.
Althia, your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm going to get into the weeds. The government says that they would be building almost 4 million units by 2031. Like, their housing plan is incredibly ambitious.
Yes.
$8.1 billion is basically the same amount of money that they plan to spend on defense in the next 5 years. It's a lot of money. Frankly, it's more ambitious than I thought it would be. It's more ambitious than what they announced. There's so many programs, it's hard to keep them straight. There's more than 23 different line items in their new housing plan. But when it comes to the carbon price, I'm not sure that this return of the money to small business, which they said they were going to do in 2019, is going to weigh in their own favor, because I don't think the program design has been carefully thought out. If you own a corner store and you hire 20 full-time people, and the corner store on the other block hires 40 part-time people, they'll get twice as much money as you will. Like, I think there's a lot of questions that are going to be asked when this budget goes line by line at committee. I will say, I think it is an ambitious budget. It's also an incredibly risky budget. What we have learned through this Liberal government is that international events can come and shock you, whether that's Donald Trump's election in 2016. Now we're facing the possibility of another Trump election, perhaps, in the fall, and a promise that a U.S. president has made to slap on 10% tariff on everything. There might be a war in the Middle East. There is no reserve fund. They're spending all of the money. They have no room to maneuver. That's, to me, maybe I'm too risk adverse, but I find that really risky.
So, Andrew, what is the biggest problem? I mean, obviously you're very concerned about growth and productivity, but what is the missing piece here that would have made this better for them in a policy perspective, but also politically?
Well, as I mentioned, the reason why our workers are not as productive as workers in other countries is they don't have as much capital to work with. We need to get radically higher rates of investment. Right now, we're not even having enough investment to replace the investment we're losing to depreciation. So the capital stock is actually shrinking. This is unheard of. So, there's been, I think, a growing awareness in the public, amongst commentators, in the news media, et cetera, that this is a serious crisis. It's a serious crisis not just because we're falling behind other countries, but because we've got the aging population and the costs that go with that.
Yeah.
For the federal government, if you look now at interest costs and the payments to the elderly and transfers to the provinces for health care, it's eating us alive. Those three items are just taking an ever-expanding share of the budget. So between a slow economy and these rising costs, we've got to do something on this. And there is almost nothing, as I say, beyond throwing money at the usual subsidies and tax credit schemes, et cetera. You're not going to move a $3 trillion economy by spraying money at a few favored sectors. You need to get every manager at every business, 1.4 million businesses across the country, you'd need to be incentivizing every single one of them to be lying awake at night saying, what can I do tomorrow to make my business run faster and more productive.
And while those things are all important, the budget is not actually targeting any of the people on this panel, right? It is targeting young people who Liberals believe that they can bring back into the fold. Chantal?
Yeah, well, except that when you're targeting young people, and I was speaking to people who have young people as children today, as it happens, you're also talking to their parents who are worried about how their kids are ever going to find a home for themselves and go on from there. So you're not just talking to young people. You're also, for all of Andrew's criticism, there is yet to be on the scene something more serious on offer. And Pierre Poilievre so far has been doing great on populism and slogans, as he did today, and a carbon tax election, which I think Andrew would agree, it doesn't contain a word of a solution for what he talks about. No. So up to a point, the people in the Liberal camp or the conservative progressive camp who are worried about the same issues as Andrew will have to find it in Pierre Poilievre's program and decide he is serious about this, or else maybe decide that the devil they know is not as bad. And I agree with Andrew, this is not the kind of budget that you build a house on. It's the kind of budget that you build an election platform on when you're in difficulty. Right.
Yeah, I agree. We have yet to hear of a serious growth plan from the Conservatives either. And frankly, I don't think the next election is going to be a carbon tax election. It was sort of peak carbon tax in the last few weeks. I don't think it's going to be a salient an issue come election time. And if I were the Conservatives, I think the government is more vulnerable on things like growth. We can't pay for anything else if we don't have a growing economy.
30 seconds to you, Althia.
Well, at the risk of being repetitive from what we have said earlier, I do think it is an election budget. It's an election budget that allows for implementation, if they can get implementation right. And this has always been a challenge from this government. There is a lot of things that they're trying, I don't want to say tie Pierre Poilievre's hands, but box him in on some things. But that depends on them getting those programs out the door. And the record shows that that may not necessarily be possible.
We'll leave it there for a Tuesday night. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you on Thursday. Thanks.